Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, my friends. How are you doing? Let's get into it. Here is the best album by 11 legendary thrash metal bands. Aside from a dip in popularity in the 90s, thrash has held strong as one of metal's most popular styles for more than 40 years. Fortunately, many of the genre's earliest acts are still here, still touring, still putting out relevant music. While that music may not top the works that have existed and been praised for decades, it's important that these artists still have so much left to say. New music will always be an entry for new generations of fans as well, who will then comb exhausting back catalogs in search of the most essential records. Here, we're highlighting the very best efforts by some of thrash's biggest names. Now, some picks were simple. We're not going to crown a Metallica album that isn't named Master of Puppets. There's Bold, and then there's Just Plain Foolish. Others, however, if you asked us again tomorrow, maybe the answer would be different. When you're dealing with greatness and near perfection, there's cases to be made for either LP in question. But right now, here's how it stands. And I actually said in a previous video to this about the band Death that on any given day, my favorite album is either Symbolic or Individual Thought Patterns. Now, you may disagree. Your album may be different. It may be the earlier stuff like Scream Bloody Gore or Leprosy, or all the way up to Death of Perseverance. But that's what I'm saying. Some albums, they're just so good, it's like choosing your favorite child. So we're going to get into it right now. The best album by 11 legendary thrash metal bands. Starting with Anthrax, Among the Living. 1987, famously, Anthrax enlisted legendary producer-engineer Eddie Kramer to capture their live vitality. It's clear within the first few moments of the monumental title track that he totally nailed it, leading to an album ripe with mosh-worthy agility and hostility. Just listen to the pulsating percussion of Illithid Confusion and anthemic cheers of One World for proof. Seeing as how metal often connects to geek culture, the LP's allusions to Stephen King, Skeleton in the Closet, and Among the Living, comic book badass Judge Dredd, and I Am the Law, cemented Anthrax's drive to deliver exactly what the audiences craved and what the genre needed. On that, I will agree. That is my favorite Anthrax album as well. We move on to Death Angel, the Ultraviolence. Death Angel were thrash metal's own boy band, if only because all the members were still in their teens and blood relatives when they recorded their first album under the guidance of head-scratching producer choice Davey Vain. Metallica guitarist Kirk Hammett had produced their 1985 demo. There is no head-scratching when it comes to Davey Vain. Davey Vain, though he's known for maybe a little bit of glam metal, a little bit of almost hair metal, Davey Vain is a very good songwriter and a killer producer. Listen to anything he's ever done, you won't be able to argue against it. The results can obviously be labeled precocious, as the Death Angel kids had no business constructing songs as complex as Thrasher, Kill Is One, and the title track. I will say this, I really like the Ultraviolence, but the turn that Death Angel made with Act 3, I truly dig that album. Their first three albums there's something good in every one of them. But Act 3 is actually my favorite, but the Ultraviolence, brutal. Exodus, Bonded by Blood. I will not agree with this one. I'm sure some of you won't either. Exodus, Bonded by Blood from 1985. In the infancy of thrash, the Bay Area was a cutthroat scene where musicians were raising the stakes, almost challenging others to best them. Exodus commanded the most attention from their peers thanks to Gary Holt's fearless riffing attack and the manic shrieks of the now late Paul Baloff. The riff mania of Bonded by Blood set the edge with the now classics such as the Chomping Piranha and the vein-splitting title track and the fan favorite Strike of the Beast. My favorite, not to be controversial, but my favorite is actually their second album, Pleasures of the Flesh. I absolutely love that album. My favorite Exodus track is track 2 on that album, Till Death Do Us Part. That is a really killer album. Paul Baloff, this is the only album he sang on, so it's not really fair because, Steve did more albums than Paul, and of course you have Rob Dukes in there as well.
And they've put out some, I mean, to choose Bonded by Blood over Fabulous Disaster, that seems kind of odd, especially with how big Toxic Waltz became. Creator, Pleasure to Kill, 1986. Another one I disagree with. Pleasure to Kill is great. Creator's sophomore album, Pleasure to Kill, arrived in the end of 1986, just a few weeks after Slayer's Rain in Blood, and you'd be hard-pressed to decide which one was more brilliantly extreme. White Knuckle Thrasher's Death Is Your Saver, Ripping Corpse, Under the Guillotine, and the title track Uncorked, some of the most rapid and brutal heavy metal ever recorded up to that time, immediately putting the U.S. thrash school on notice. Pleasure to Kill, great album. I would have to say, and mine's a toss-up, either Extreme Aggression or Coma of Souls. And it's one of those, it depends on which day it's on. But those are my two favorite Creator albums. Obviously, those were the first two albums that were put out when they got onto a major label, but it's not just the major label thing. Creator were always moving forward. Pleasure to Kill led to Terrible Certainty, which led to Extreme Aggression, which led to Coma of Souls. Everything was a step forward, at least until Coma of Souls, and then their next album was Renewal, and Biohazard's Infectious, I guess, because it just sounded like Creator doing a Biohazard album. Then we go to Megadeth, Rust in Peace. Megadeth, Rust in Peace, 1990, as thrash spread its wings, taking on new forms. Dave Mustaine rewrote the rules on the tech shred classic Rust in Peace. His labyrinthine song structures kept any listener on heightened alert, blazing through riff after riff, injecting it with volleying melodies and igniting all-time solo duels with Marty Friedman. When grunge came along to overshadow heavy metal shortly after, Pantera's Power Groove ended up dominating over the thrash albums that would be released in the ensuing years. Regardless, this surgical guitar playing had a halo effect on the metal underground, ushering in a new wave of guitar greats. And I kind of go with that, without a doubt. Subsequent albums, Countdown to Extinction, Euthanasia, those are terrific albums too. The thing when it comes to Rust in Peace is Dave Mustaine really thought he had something there too, because he, with that album, had finally gotten out of the shadow of Metallica. But then Metallica obviously came back because they released a year later the Black Album. So he got some peace, but it was short-lived. Speaking of Metallica, Master of Puppets, 1986. Metallica's inexorable climb from obscurity to ubiquity wouldn't really be complete until 1991's The Black Album crossed over into the mainstream, but the group managed to launch thrash out of the underground trenches in scarcely 3 years when Master of Puppets achieved platinum respectively. And how could it not, with impeccable classics such as Battery, Welcome Home, Disposable Heroes, and the title track showing the world what perfection sounded like. Despite several worthy challengers, this remains the ultimate thrash album. My favorite off there is Leper Messiah, and of course people are going to argue against Master of Puppets because of the amazing Ride the Lightning. But here we are. Moving on to Municipal Waste, The Art of Partying from 2007. Okay, if you're looking to turn your boring party into art, then look no further than Municipal Waste's brilliant 2007 album, The Art of Partying. Veering away from some of their more crust punk-infused crossover tendencies and redirecting their focus on a more metallic-focused lead guitar, the Waste enthusiastic riffing is complemented by Tony Foresta's tales of nighttime debauchery, the art of partying, beer pressure, and schoolyard fun, lunch hall food brawl. Overkill, The Years of Decay. Not going to argue. Working class New Jersey thrash mainstays Overkill have a couple of strong contenders for the top spot in their 20-album catalog, riding an impressive late career upswing to boot. And yeah, those contenders most definitely would be the albums that bookend The Years of Decay with Horoscope and Under the Influence, and then their first major label release, Taking Over. Those are superb albums, every one of them. The only downside, actually, of Horoscope for me is, one, it doesn't have Bobby playing guitar, and two, I couldn't care less about hearing Overkill do a cover of Frankenstein. Just, ugh. But it never got better than the Years of Decay, which boast all-time killers in elimination and time to kill. There's 3 cuts that eclipse 8 minutes, which makes this Overkill's most dynamic work, skillfully implementing groove, blues, and doom. It is a superb album. And the last one with Bobby Gustafsson, I believe is how you say his last name, tremendously gifted guitarist, got it, a little bit into Hetfield. I would have really liked to have seen where Overkill would have gone if they stuck with Bobby. But apparently, as the story goes, Bobby wanted to go one way, Dee Dee wanted to go another way. They had already gone through 2 drummers, so I don't think the drummer had a say. And I think Blitz was the deciding factor, and he stuck with Dee Dee. The next album was Horoscope. Fantastic album, like I said, with the exception of the Frankenstein cover. But then their next album after that, I Hear Black, it's almost like they were trying to do sort of a Black Sabbath, Metallica Black album. But again, they're 20 albums in, with their last album being Scorched. And ever since they came back with Ironbound, they have been steadily putting out albums that are just top-notch. Sepultura, Beneath the Remains. Man, that's... Sepultura have a holy trilogy for me. It starts with Beneath the Remains, goes right into Arise, and ends with Chaos AD. I mean, those 3 albums are... There's not a bad moment on the 3. So any one of those 3 I can agree with, and Beneath the Remains I totally see. So let's get into it. Sepultura, Beneath the Remains, 1989, as thrash pockets were emerging around the world. Bay Area, the East Coast, Germany. Brazil was cooking up a different kind of beast altogether. Sepultura were instrumental in establishing the early death metal sound on Schizophrenia and blurred the lines between thrash and death on all-timer Beneath the Remains, taking a socio-political themes to portray their strife. 4 Pieces Roadrunner debut put them on the global metal map, cementing their legacy with cuts such as Mass Hypnosis, Inner Self, Primitive Future, are still a revered cultural export. We move on to Slayer's Rain and Blood. When it comes to Slayer, there's 3 albums, again, that are like a trilogy. You have, of course, what we're looking at now, Rain and Blood, but of course South of Heaven and Seasons in the Abyss. It was 86, 88, and 90, and they got better and better and better. I think the crowning album would be Seasons in the Abyss, but again, it could be really any one of the 3, so Rain and Blood, why not? Slayer, Rain and Blood, 1986, as with Metallica and Master of Puppets, is Slayer's 3rd LP, Rain and Blood, that remains their signature sequence and one of the absolute best thrash metal albums of all time. From its beautifully macabre cover to its honed chemistry of focused and ferocious hookiness is masterful. Of course, Raining Blood makes for an iconic finale. Its seamless emergence from the militaristic post-mortem is downright ingenious, but everything that comes before it is nearly faultless too. For instance, Angel of Death is delightfully visceral in multiple ways. Jesus Saves is an increasingly relevant rebuttal of oppressive dogma, and both Epidemic and Necrophobic are relentlessly agitated. In less than 30 minutes, Slayer cemented their legacy. We go from there to Testament's The Legacy. Testament, The Legacy. Now, again, with Testament, if you were to nail me down and say, what's your favorite Testament album, it would really be a throw up between Practice What You Preach and Low. I love Practice What You Preach because it seemed that Chuck really opened up as a vocalist, especially when you hear songs like The Ballad, Greenhouse Effect. But then Low, Alex leaves, they bring in James Murphy and put out one of the heaviest albums they had put out up to that date. So, The Legacy, let's go with it. Although it arrived hot on the heels of the most influential releases by Thrash's Big Four, Testament's 1987 debut, The Legacy was anything but overshadowed. Instead, it sounded like a harbinger of Thrash's second coming, and while a second generation of multi-platinum thrash bands would not materialize, in the end, The Legacy still ranks among the most accomplished and exciting thrash albums of them all, thanks to simultaneously fierce, refined, and irresistible mosh pit anthems, as in Over the Wall, Burnt Offerings, Do or Die, and Apocalyptic City. And, just for me, Alone in the Dark, that was a song that really penetrated and got into my brain, a little earwig from the first album. All this in Curse of the Legions of Death, a stone cold classic. So that is the list, with the exception of Municipal Waste, which I would have chosen a more deserving band, in my opinion. Flotsam and Jetsam, Metal Church, it is what it is. But it's a good little list, something to go over with. And I'm sure you disagree. I disagreed with some. You heard why I disagree. But I hope you dug it. The best album by 11 legendary thrash metal bands. See you in the next video. Later.